such a great, impactful conversation. I will say that I'm trying something new. I don't know if you can see, but I have a live fundraiser. It's a button that I saw that I was like, you know what, why not? And so if anyone wants to donate to International Dyslexia Association, I'm actually more so interested to see how this button works during a live. So if anyone is interested, and why not? But let's delve in for the purpose of this conversation. I'm going to introduce myself, and then Sabrina, I would love if you could introduce yourself. So those of you who are not following me and you're Sabrina's followers, I should say, I'm Dr. Lauren, and I am a special educator. I am not an adult with dyslexia, but fighting for dyslexia has always been a passion of mine, and a lot of it is because I started my career in a private dyslexic school. So now, fast forward 10 years later, and all the experiences I've had, I've created this account, and it's just been such a great resource for a lot of folks out there. And so I always want to bring new content to you all, because I know that there are a lot of parents who are looking for resources and questions, and doing these lives are very helpful. So I found Sabrina on Instagram, and I was like, you know what, I would love to have that legal perspective. So Sabrina, do you mind introducing yourself?
Yeah, thank you so much. And I love your page. I love your feed. You have excellent information, and there is such a need for that.
Thank you.
My name is Sabrina Axt. I am a special education attorney in the San Francisco Bay Area. And I am also a mother to a daughter with dyslexia. She actually goes to a private dyslexia school that you mentioned. And I feel so passionate about it. I didn't know anything about learning disabilities or dyslexia before she was diagnosed. And it just turned into a passion project for me. And I want to help all the kids out there get appropriate.
Definitely. And you have that legal professional perspective, and also that parent perspective. And I feel like that really can speak to a lot of our audience out there. So those of you who have seen my lives, you know that I like to focus on at least 4 questions and hit the ground running. So let's start with our first one. So Sabrina, can you explain a little bit about what special education law looks like, and how often do you actually see dyslexia cases in your area?
So I have kind of built a niche practice, almost specializing in dyslexia. I don't specialize in dyslexia cases per se, but that's kind of what I've gravitated towards, because that's where my passion lies, given my daughter's diagnosis. I actually do see a lot of dyslexia cases, and typically where I see them is actually an undiagnosed situation. Okay. Where there are other learning disabilities at play. For example, I see a lot of kids that come to me with autism and ADHD, and that's what's in the IEP, and that's what's being targeted, and they totally miss the dyslexia.
Right.
And so, I had this child in 5th grade who is reading at a kindergarten level, and nobody seems to know why. And they just blame the ADHD a lot of times. That's what I see. It's like, well, it's because they're not focusing. It's because they're not paying attention. When, if you look through all the reports, you consistently seeing, decoding and making up nonsense words. And, you can see all the red flags. And I'm like, how did nobody catch this?
Exactly.
So that is typically where I see dyslexia. It's not one of those things where, it's not often that a parent comes to me and says, my child has dyslexia, I want to get better services. It's usually they have something else and the dyslexia was missed.
See, and that's the area that is so disturbing to me as a special educator, because what are the special educators doing? I mean, if those students are in a class that is a general education setting, sometimes there is a gen ed and a special ed teacher in there, but it's just mind-boggling if you're in 5th grade, and this is public school you're talking about, correct? Right. So if you're in 5th grade and there are kids who are reading at a kindergarten level, where's the sense of urgency of, you can't just, there's something else, there's a root cause there. So
exactly.
That's great that you are able. Oh, can you still hear me?
I can hear
Oh,
you.
okay. I think you were lagging a little. Can you still hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. I feel like because you also have that passion as a mom as well, you really know, like, there, you know, we really have to fight for this. I mean, that's egregious.
It is a great, and you know, I'm not a professional like you are. And you know, I can look through the IEP documents and I just start looking through and I'm like, oh, red flag, red flag, red flag. And I'm like, guess what, parent? I'm not a professional, but your child's dyslexic. We,
Right.
we need
Right.
to, you know, that's why they're struggling. And I've seen it. I have a case right now, a child in SDC class, his entire life can't read. And it's because they haven't diagnosed the dyslexia. So
Wow.
that has never been, you know, addressed.
Right, right. And if you don't address it, it's just going to get worse.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
that's what the data supports. So you know what, Sabrina, this leads me to my next question. And I know that you and I had a conversation about this, and I've been at the IEP table where it is very contentious. And I have had an advocate at an IEP meeting, and more than often, gen ed teachers and the special ed team is like, great, they're bringing an advocate. This isn't a good thing. But I've also had a lawyer at the table as well. Can you talk a little bit about the difference between advocacy through the legal lens versus due process? Because due process is more of a more serious circumstance, correct?
Yeah.
So what's the difference between the two?
So really advocacy is, I mean, that's kind of the all-encompassing term.
Right.
But in the profession, because there are lay advocates, we typically describe advocacy as everything up until due process.
Okay.
A lot of times people will retain advocates to go with them to IEP meetings, help them draft goals, you know, see what they do on an informal basis. Lawyers tend to be brought in when the case is going to due process, and that is legal action, hearings, judges, things like that. In my practice, I actually do like to get involved earlier in the case. I prefer the advocacy part. And in my experience, I think school districts get a little scared when they go, oh, an attorney's coming, and that raises all kinds of red flags for them.
Exactly.
But at the same time, it lets the school district know that the parents are serious.
Right.
And I do like to get involved because I do want to help families earlier on in the case, but also by getting involved earlier, I kind of preserve and set the case up for due process
Just
as needed.
Yeah.
You know, gather all the evidence now and set it up so that everybody knows where this is headed. It's always my goal, prepare for due process, hope you don't need to go.
Right.
And thus far, I've been pretty successful with that. I think once you kind of get involved in the case and you've had more than one meeting with the school district, everybody seems to kind of calm down a little bit.
Right.
So far, so good.
And I always say that once a school or a school district says this child has dyslexia, they have to own it. And owning it means they actually have to do something about it. And doing something about it requires money. And
that's
the money,
why they don't want to diagnose it.
Exactly. And the money aspect is time of training the teachers, but you can't just get anyone to come in to train the teachers. And depending on how big the school district is, that's a lot of money. And then from my experience, they only want to either focus on the reading specialists or the special educators, when really anyone, I feel, as an educator should be able to at least know early indicators. If you have a 9th grade English teacher, they should be able to say, I'm noticing here a few things. Hey, have you guys ever looked into this? You know, when talking to the parents at conferences. So I really truly believe that, you know, it's like, let's turn the other way, because if we say it, we have to own it. And that's really the big issue.
It is. And you're right. It really does come down to money. You know, our schools are terribly underfunded. IDEA has never been fully funded. And, you know, yeah, there's legal obligations that come along with, you know, saying, yep, your child has dyslexia. So I do feel that unfortunately, everybody turns a blind eye.
I know.
And the onus really is on the parents to recognize it and ask for an evaluation, and then keep pushing and pushing and pushing, because it's so easy to say, oh, it's just ADHD.
Right.
That's the one that I see all the time. It's like, oh, they're just not paying attention.
Right.
If they would
That's the
pay
primary.
attention, everything would be fine.
That's the primary disability, when really that's probably not the primary disability. Yeah. Well, I always say that there are those certain communities where parents just don't know what they don't know. So I'm curious, because I don't really know your area and school district and things of that nature, but typically, what are the demographics and the socioeconomic statuses of some of these cases that you are working with? And how are the parents engaging in this? Is it like a aha moment, like I knew something was wrong, or it's like, wow, you really opened up my world to something that I didn't realize was going on?
So I just want to preface this, that I live in a rather affluent suburb.
Okay. And that's fair.
That's where I'm getting a lot of my clients from. Typically, my clients are middle to, upper middle class families. And really, what it comes down to is they know something's not right. They know something's going on with their child, and they're just not getting help from the public schools. These are people that have the ability to hire an advocate or an attorney to help them, but not necessarily enough cash flow to be able to afford a special, dyslexia school. We do have several of those around here in the Bay Area. They are extremely expensive.
Yes. And because essentially San Francisco's like the West Coast Manhattan, right?
Yes.
It's just very, very expensive. And I know right now I'm working in a private school. It's not specialized, but I did work at a specific private school, and this was 5-6 years ago, but the tuition for elementary school was $42,000 a year. That's crazy, but
we have what you were getting here that are getting pretty close to $100,000.
Wow.
But it's kind of all over the place. My daughter's school does not charge that. But, the biggest problem that we're encountering is availability.
Yes.
That's the biggest problem is, you have these families that move into a nice neighborhood that supposedly has excellent schools, and then they enter the special education realm, and they're just getting all kinds of pushback. And there's several schools, they all mean well, but they tend to be very small. And, you have to have the small class size and everything. So even if parents can afford it, they can't get in.
Right.
There's no availability. And it's like, well, what do we do? The school's supposed to help us, but they're not. We can't get them into private school. Where do we go from here? Do we just hire private tutors? Do we homeschool? I've actually encountered a lot of people in my community that end up pulling their kids out of school and homeschooling because they can't afford to go to a private school, or they can't get in.
Wow.
But that it's such a need because there aren't enough of the private schools to send these kids to.
Right. Exactly.
So,
having these conversations with so many different professionals in different fields, it's the same thing. We're all saying the same thing. And, this is why I still fight for this cause, where how do we bridge this gap? Honestly, I think this is a start, having these conversations, putting them out on YouTube, having them accessible where people can hopefully Google stuff, and then they see these conversations are happening worldwide, so they don't feel like they're alone. Because sometimes we don't have the money, sometimes we don't have the resources, but I think there is a sense of knowing that you're not alone in that thinking, or like, wow, I didn't even know what was going on, but I know someone else is experiencing that. This is just such needed work.
Yeah. And there still is such a stigma around special education.
Absolutely.
And like, people don't want to talk about it. And it's heartbreaking because
Right.
then people they don't get the resources that they need, or they don't
Exactly.
think that there's something wrong with their child. And yes, there's nothing wrong with your child. They just think differently. They learn differently.
Exactly.
And, you know, it's funny because that was one of my passion projects as well. I was always very open with everyone in our community. We live in a very small town where like everybody knows each other's business. Mm-hmm. And I was always really, really open about our journey with my daughter's dyslexia and talking to her about it. I explained it to her from day one so that she understands it. And, you know, she has turned into her own best advocate.
Yes.
This little 10-year-old goes around talking to her friends about dyslexia and explains what it is to them and why she goes to a different school. And she's even had, you know, kids bring up, oh, well, it's because you're stupid or you can't read or whatever. And she just, no, that's not it. I am smart. I just learn differently. And so I think it's really important to talk about these things because what, you aren't alone. You know, dyslexia is quite common, as you know.
It really
there's
is.
More people out there than you think there are. And, you know, we have to talk about it, and we have to, you know, fight for our kids. I mean, just for example, right now, California has introduced a bill for universal screening for dyslexia.
Well, that's because your governor is dyslexic.
Well, yes, he is. I don't know how much he's doing to help the cause, but it's been introduced and it's stalling out right now.
Wow.
And so it's like, we need to talk about this. This is so important to have universal screening for dyslexia at a time that you can actually do something about it.
Exactly.
You know, it's not as helpful to discover it when you're in 9th grade.
Or when you're 35 and maybe you dropped out of high school. Right.
You know, the school prison pipeline, I think
exactly.
You know, federal inmates get screened for dyslexia.
Yes.
It's like, really? Why are we waiting until people are incarcerated to screen for dyslexia?
Exactly. And that is a separate conversation for sure.
Oh, yeah.
And I have to plug my friend Hildebrand Pelzer III. I did an interview with him last December, and that's his life's work because he's been a principal in the criminal justice system, and he realized these people can't read. And so that's like his push. But I want to get back to us.
That's fabulous.
Yes, you should check it out. It's a really great interview. It's on my YouTube channel. So Sabrina, we are coming to the end of our interview, and if you all would love a part 2, I'm always all about part 2s, but I would love if you could give some maybe 3 top tip takeaways. When should parents look for a special education lawyer? And I really loved how it sounded like it doesn't have to be when things are really, really, really bad. So I'm curious to know, what can you offer our audience in those 3 tips?
So I would say, you know, you can seek out a special education attorney at any point in your journey. We all kind of do different things. It is very much a niche practice. There are some attorneys that really only focus on discipline and manifestation determinations. There are some that really only focus on getting your child into an NPS, a non-public school. So ask around, you know, talk to these attorneys, do consultations, talk with them, see how they work. Attorneys like myself, and I know there are several of them out there, I will actually work with parents behind the scenes if necessary. You know, if you're at the beginning of your IEP journey, you don't want to be bringing an attorney to the IEP table.
Right.
If everything is totally fine, you know, with your school, keep it that way.
Right. Exactly.
I do work with parents behind the scenes because if you can get the IEP set up right the first time, you're going to save yourself so many headaches.
Exactly. Yes, I agree with you so much.
Yeah. So I do that. You know, if it becomes necessary for me to actually go to the IEP meeting and get more involved, I do that as well. You don't necessarily need to wait until the situation has just devolved down into chaos and you're just fighting back and forth, and it's like, okay, I'm ready to sue you guys.
Right.
You don't have to wait to that point to hire an attorney. There are also, very skilled advocates out there. Just know that, not all advocates are equal. Anybody can hold themselves out as an advocate. So really look at the qualifications and, things like that. But yeah, you don't need to wait for a big crisis to hire a special education attorney to work with you. The one thing that I will say that is nice about working with a special education attorney is because we are lawyers, we can give legal advice.
Yes.
That is the one thing. An advocate can really help you through the process. They know the law, they know what you're entitled to, but they technically can't give you legal advice.
Mm-hmm.
I can.
Right.
So.
No, I think honestly, what I want to highlight is I love the fact that we said earlier, let's talk about, let's debunk this myth of special ed is just cringy and awful and there's something wrong with you. Like, let's put that on the table, and let's put this on the table. You don't need a special education lawyer when things are really, 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 really bad. And I think that if we can clear the air about that, that can make this process a bit smoother, and it can, it's a partnership. It's a partnership.
It is. It's a partnership. And you know what? Special education law and the whole process, it's very confusing. It's very technical, and parents are at a distinct disadvantage because they don't know the law. They don't know how things work, and they rely on the schools to just tell them what they need to do. And so it's never too early to consult with somebody, even if it's just to, what are my rights? What do I do here? What's the strategy? And it's actually a lot easier and less expensive to get the help early on in your journey, to put you on the right path. And I actually make it a point to educate my parents.
That's great.
Hopefully they can just take it from there.
Right, exactly.
The parents are always the child's best advocate.
Mm-hmm.
So once they learn how the process works and what their rights are, then they can go forth and continue. That's always my goal.
Now, I really appreciate those tips, and I also really appreciate this conversation, and I really hope that all of you who are listening, if you are not following Sabrina, please do. It's Axt Legal, correct? That's your handle. Yes. So please follow her for her amazing information, legal information. Book an appointment if you feel like you need her. Well, actually, no, you only practice in California. So if you're in California, but anyway, thank you so much, Sabrina, for your time. And I loved this conversation.
Oh yeah. Thank you so much for having me. It's been great.
All right. Well, have a good rest of your morning.
Yes. And you too. And have a great weekend.
Thanks. Happy 4th.
Yes.
Bye.
Bye.